And I am delighted to welcome to the stage Aimee Cox, who is a research associate with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And today, Aimee is going to be sharing with us some details of a recent research project that her organization did. But also, it's a great opportunity for us to have an overall discussion on technology trends and solutions related to older drivers. So, Aimee, if you want to jump on the stage here with me, we will get this started. First off, thanks for coming out. When I read the press release about this research, I was like, I really want to get somebody on to talk in more detail about this. But Aimee, before we dive into the the research and the things that your organization is doing related to older drivers, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you landed in the role there at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Again, my name is Aimee Cox, and as Steve mentioned, I'm a research associate with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. I graduated in 2019 from the University of South Florida with a Master's of Public Health and Epidemiology. I've been always fascinated by human behavior and why people do some things that maybe sometimes we shouldn't do. But then also on the other hand, we have, healthy habits, healthy behaviors. So after graduation, I accepted a fellowship at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Department of Transportation, in their Office of Behavioral Safety Research, and spent some time there and accepted the position here at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, or IIHS, where I can really just hone in on my research skills. And since joining the Institute in 2020, I've been designated the older driver researcher. So that is my primary focus, but I've also been working on some distracted driving a bit, and as I'll talk about a little bit more, some of the older driver technologies or technologies in general, but that could benefit older drivers.
Yeah, the this is great. But man, what a great career path for you. And I can tell we chatted before this. Amy's really passionate about this, and but the yeah, we're a big fan here, even though we are focusing on older adults. Sort of the concept of universal design is that a product that can help an older adult can help all ages, you know, and distracted drivers. There's no sort of age limit on that. Okay, we can all become distracted, and so to the audience, be thinking about these things, not just exclusive to the folks that we are probably tuning in on, whether it be our clients, ourselves, or our loved ones, but for all demographics. The safer our roads, the better it is for everybody.
Absolutely.
So I know you've got a presentation so that we can graphically kind of see some of the details on the research. So what I'm going to do is dive behind the curtain here, but I want to make sure to remind the audience that at any point in time you have a question or something that you want Aimee to elaborate more on, just type it into Q&A, or I can usually keep pretty good tabs on comments there. And then Aimee, feel free to take a pause and check in with me, or if something really pops up, you might see my face pop up on the screen.
Sounds great. All right, I will share my screen here. How does that look?
Looks good.
Awesome. All right. Well, yes. So I'm going to speak about older drivers' vehicles in general. We conducted a couple of different research studies in the last 2 or so years, really focusing on what kinds of vehicles older drivers are driving, and what sort of safety implications they might have. So I wanted to spend the first half of this presentation talking about vehicle safety improvements in general. So I'll share with you how vehicle crash worthiness, or in other words, how well a vehicle protects an occupant when involved in a crash, has improved in recent years. So some of you might also be familiar with the crash test that IIHS conducts, but I wanted to give a quick overview. The moderate overlap front crash test was the very first crash test conducted by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and this began in 1995. So this test is designed to be like what would happen in a head-on crash between two similarly weighted vehicles traveling just under 40 miles per hour. In the side impact test that was introduced in 2003, an SUV-like barrier hits the driver's side of a vehicle when traveling at approximately 31 miles per hour. The following year, we introduced the head restraints and seats test. And that was designed to evaluate and rate the ability of seats and head restraints to prevent neck injury and rear end crashes. Next, the roof strength test came along in 2009, and this is designed to mimic a rollover crash. Some of you might have heard the story about Tiger Woods. I believe it was over a year ago now, but a lot of that had to do with the strength of the roof and the vehicle that he was traveling in that rolled over. The small overlap front test, so the driver's side began in 2012 and the passenger side began in 2017. These are designed to replicate what happens when the respective front corner crashes with an object like a tree, utility pole, even another vehicle. And so the fall of last year, fall of 2021, we introduced a new side 2.0 crash test. This updated test uses a heavier barrier and is performed at a higher speed and actually results in an 82% increase in crash energy over the original test. This new test better represents the side crashes that are happening on our roads today. Think about how vehicles are heavier. We have more SUVs in our today's fleet than when the first side impact test began in 2003. So I wanted to bring this video in to help illustrate how a vehicle that rated good in a crash test differs from how a vehicle that rated poor does in the same exact test. So notice the extent of the occupant cabin damage in the top vehicle, the 2001 model. This is our side impact crash test. Here we have the head restraints and seats. The roof strength. And the small overlap. You can see the changes that Honda was able to implement again to the occupant cabin in just 2 model years. So it's pretty impressive how quickly manufacturers are able to implement changes. So we just saw how a vehicle that earned a good rating differs from one that rated poor and what that looks like within our testing facility. But what do these differences in crash test ratings mean in terms of injury outcomes on our roads in the real world? Well, compared with vehicles that rated poor, vehicles that rated good in the moderate overlap front test result in a 46% fatality risk reduction among the general population. In the original side impact test, fatality risk is reduced by 70% in vehicles that rated good compared with those that rated poor. And neck injuries can be reduced by as much as 35% in vehicles that rated good in the head restraints test. So though injury outcomes are measurably reduced in vehicles with good ratings versus those with poor ratings, we found that through conducting a survey that older drivers are more likely to say that safety ratings are not at all important to them than middle-aged drivers. Just 4% of middle-aged drivers said safety ratings weren't at all important, but this rose to 9% among drivers ages 70 to 79 and 10% among participants 80 and older. These graphs show how vehicle crash worthiness has improved over time in each of the vehicle crash tests that the Institute conducts. We can see how with each model year, the proportion of vehicles that earned a good rating or those in green have increased. So yellow is representing acceptable, orange is marginal, and red is poor. So again, once a crash test is in place, manufacturers can really implement these changes to improve crashworthiness quite rapidly. So vehicles are becoming safer, in part because of government regulations, which mandate the equipment of safety features, and because of ratings programs like what we do here. This encourages manufacturers to design and build safer vehicles. And you can notice how many of the vehicles tested did not earn the highest rating of good in some of these tests just 10 years ago. So crashworthiness relates to how well a vehicle protects occupants in the event of a crash. And crash avoidance technologies now exist to help prevent a crash from occurring in the first place, or at least mitigate the crash severity. This graph shows the expected increase in the registered vehicles that will have individual crash avoidance technologies from calendar year 2020 in gray to 2025 in yellow. So the percent of registered vehicles estimate to have any of these features increases substantially in just 5 years' time. And although we do expect to see a jump in the registered vehicles that have these technologies in the next few years, I wanted to highlight rear cameras briefly. Vehicles manufactured after May 1st, 2018 are required by a federal mandate to have them, and many vehicles had them before the mandate even took effect. But we can see that in 2025, we don't anticipate even 70% of the registered vehicles on the roads will have them. Since there are older vehicles on the roads in our fleets, it can take a very long time once a safety feature is introduced to be on every single vehicle on our roads. Similarly, many of you might have heard the recent news that 20 automakers have pledged to voluntarily equip virtually all new passenger vehicles with front automatic emergency braking by next month, which is September of 2022. But by 2025, we expect only about 35% of the vehicles on the roads to have AEB. So even though this is really exciting news and it's a great step towards improved road safety, it will be many, many more years before most vehicles on our roads will have automatic emergency braking. It's also worth noting that it's just important for these technologies to be used and to be used properly in order to realize their potential safety benefits. It won't matter if vehicles have these crash protection systems if drivers are disengaging them. So it's vital that drivers know how to use these crash avoidance systems and are comfortable with doing so. So this video shows how we test the front automatic emergency braking. The vehicle-to-vehicle front crash prevention tests are run at 12 and 25 miles per hour. We can see here. We also do pedestrian crash prevention system testing, just tested under 3 scenarios, the first being pedestrians, an adult crossing. We also have a child crossing. Finally, we do pedestrian testing with an adult standing in the lane. You can see that the vehicle slowed down some, but ultimately still hit the adult dummy. And we are running these tests at night as well. And we began rating vehicle-to-vehicle front crash prevention systems in 2013. You can see how the proportion of systems tested earned the top rating of superior, or those represented by the darkest green, has increased in under 10 years. Front crash prevention systems with auto brake can reduce police-reported crashes of all severities by half and injuries by 56% among the general population. As with vehicle-to-vehicle front crash prevention systems, new vehicles are increasingly equipped with those pedestrian crash prevention systems and earn the top rating of superior over time. These systems can reduce pedestrian crashes by 27%. So we can see here the proportion in 2019, we had 21% that rated superior. By 2022 model year, 54% rated superior. So not only are more new vehicles equipped with these pedestrian crash prevention systems each year, but the systems themselves are rapidly improving. Many of you might be familiar with our Top Safety Pick and Top Safety Pick Plus awards. So I wanted to share how the Institute determines award winners. To be considered, a vehicle must first earn a rating of good in each of the 6 crash tests that evaluate the vehicle's crashworthiness. Then we look at the headlight and front crash prevention ratings. In order to be awarded the top safety pick, the vehicle must be equipped with front crash prevention systems and earn a rating of either advanced or superior. Headlamps that earn ratings of acceptable or good in the headlamp evaluation program are not standard equipment on all trim levels, but are optional. Then to earn the top safety pick plus, the front crash prevention systems must meet the same qualifications, and headlights that have earned ratings of acceptable or good must be standard equipment on all trim levels. So Steve, I think this might be a good place to take a pause and see if there are any questions on the crashworthiness and the crash avoidance technology aspect and how vehicles have changed in the last few years.
Yeah, and the adaptive headlights, could you elaborate a little bit on like what are adaptive headlights?
Of course. So the Institute does consider 2 metrics when evaluating our headlights. The first would be the amount of glare produced for other drivers, which I know is a huge concern for older drivers specifically. So we measure the amount of glare that another driver on the road might see from the headlight. And the second is the amount of roadway illumination that is produced from the bulb itself. So those are the 2 things that we determine or use for metrics when determining our ratings. But I can speak briefly to how headlights have improved in recent years. Adaptive headlamps being curve adaptive headlamps or headlights, those turn with the driver's steering input. So say, for example, you're traveling down a dark road at night, that is curved, you turn the steering wheel, the headlights turn with the driver's input. Another really great technology that's available now on some new vehicles is the automatic high beams. These detect the presence of oncoming traffic in dark or low ambient light conditions and automatically adjust between high and low beams.
Oh, wow. Boy, these are some features I'd love to have on my next car. So the
Yes.
couple of questions, and then I know you're going to dive into the specific research a little bit, but this is great background. And let's see, Ken Silverstein asks, how are the vehicles selected for testing? I'm curious about that as well. Do you guys just go out there and automatically test everybody, or do the automakers submit for testing?
This would be a question that I can't answer completely, that I would need to talk to our testing engineers and the people who actually run the testing operations. I do believe, though, that there is some coordination with the manufacturers. And I know we have so many that we've tested, and we try and test on almost a daily basis, I believe. But in terms of how specifically we do it and how that's coordinated, unfortunately, I can't answer.
Okay, great. I know that I know your offices are in Arlington, Virginia, but do you use testing sites all over the country?
Great question. Our primary facility or testing facility is down outside of Charlottesville, Virginia.
Okay.
So it's about 2.5 hours outside of the DC area. So we have half of our staff are down there. We do have researchers that are at the facility as well, in terms of the trend researchers like traffic safety and vehicle effectiveness and all of that. But all of the crash testing and the pedestrian AEB and vehicle to vehicle AEB are done at that facility.
Great. And then Sheila asks, when automatic emergency braking for all cars, do you know how this will be legislated? Like how will I guess it's just a new car that is sold at a dealership after a certain period of time is going to have the emergency brakes.
That's generally how it works when there are federal mandates for certain safety equipment. What's taking effect next month is not a federal mandate. The 20 manufacturers that joined the commitment to equip nearly every passenger vehicle that manufactured after next month, that is voluntary at this time. But for example, when I mentioned the reverse camera sensors or systems, that was federally mandated, but manufacturers had years to meet that mandate. And so it's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not a matter of they say, okay, you have 6 months to start equipping. As I mentioned, many of the vehicles before 2018, before the actual like effect date, had them equipped. So it's a slow process.
Great. And then, well, here, I'm just going to go through a few more of these, and then we'll go to the second half of your presentation, which is going to be this research project. But Dixie is back today. She was here yesterday, and she had some great questions and comments. And this is something that Aimee and I was talking about right before we came on. And please comment on how the new fleet of electric vehicles are making the roads safer, or can we correlate electric vehicles with safety?
At this point, I don't know that we can because they are relatively new. But two things that I can point out in terms of electric vehicles and crashworthiness or safety is that they weigh more. So when you think about two crash partners, if one vehicle weighs more than the other, the lighter vehicle is going to end up with much more damage and possibly more injuries. So the fact that these vehicles weigh more because of the battery weight could have positive, could have negative. It could be positive safety implications for the occupants of these vehicles, especially if they're hit by other heavily weighted vehicles. But then contrary, on the other hand, they accelerate rapidly. And so that has some safety concerns as well. I think it's going to be a while before we can see these vehicles on the roads and get the real crash data to really determine what sort of safety implications, positive or negative, there are from them.
Okay, great. I think what I'm going to do, we've got a few, Leilani, Margie, and we've got a few other questions in the queue, but I'm going to sort of pause because I want to hear the second half of your presentation. This was more of an overview of your organization, and I'm sure that'll bring up more questions as well as getting into the topic more of older drivers. So everybody be patient on there if you've got a question in the queue, and I'm going to duck behind the curtain and let you keep on going. Thanks a lot, Aimee.
Sounds great. So, yep, it's possible too that I might even answer some of these questions with the older driver research specifically, and happy to spend some time at the end answering questions that we didn't get to. But yes, I'll absolutely move on to what all of this means in terms of vehicle safety, crashworthiness, crash avoidance technologies for older drivers specifically. So good news, older drivers' crash rates have declined since they peaked in the mid-1990s. This shows police reported crash rates. They declined 35% among drivers ages 70 to 74, 50% among drivers ages 75 to 79, and 55% among those 80 and older. So huge declines among the older drivers. If you take a look here, let me turn on this laser pointer here. The middle-aged drivers' crash rates actually increased over the time period. So certainly we're seeing some positive trends in the right direction when it comes to crashes for older drivers. But however, although their crash rates have declined substantially, when older drivers are involved in a crash, they have the highest risk of dying, and that's due to age-related frailty and fragility. So you can see on this graph here that crash fatality rates increase with increasing age. So therefore, older drivers can really use all of the crash protection they can get from the newer vehicles that are more crashworthy and equipped with the crash avoidance technologies. But what we've been finding, though, is that the oldest drivers drive the oldest vehicles. These data come from a survey that we conducted on older and middle-aged drivers, where we asked participants how old the vehicle they primarily drove was. About half of drivers in their 70s, so those are going to be represented by the lighter blue, said their vehicle was over 6 years old. Drivers 80 and older, the dark blue bars, were most likely to have driven the oldest vehicles, with almost 40% indicating their vehicle was older than 10 years, and over 60% saying their vehicle was at least 10 years old. So this means that many older drivers are driving vehicles that likely have not undergone many of the crashworthiness improvements that we've seen in the last 10 years or so. And so many certainly don't have the vehicles with crash avoidance technologies that have become more common in the last 3 to 5 years. So this is a bit troubling for the oldest drivers because they're the most at risk of dying in a crash, and they're least likely to drive the safer vehicles simply because of the vehicles being older themselves. We think there are a few things that play into why the oldest drivers drive the oldest vehicles. First, many older drivers purchase their last vehicle at retirement, so the vehicle ages with the driver. And we can see this playing out here in a way. We can see more drivers in their 70s had vehicles under 3 years old than the two other age groups. So more drivers in their 70s had newer vehicles than middle-aged drivers. Another thing we know is that income is lower in retirement, and higher income is associated with newer vehicle age. Also, drivers consider old vehicles with low mileage to be just as safe as new vehicles, though we know this isn't necessarily the case when considering the improvements to both crashworthiness and the increased availability of crash avoidance technologies that have occurred in the last few years or so. So since older drivers drive fewer miles than their middle-aged counterparts, older drivers keep their low mileage vehicles longer. We conducted another study where we analyzed crashes that occurred in Florida between 2014 and 2018. Here we found that since older drivers are driving the oldest vehicles, their vehicles are less likely to be equipped with key safety features. So ESC was federally mandated in 2011. So all 2012 model year and newer vehicles have ESC as standard. Federal side impact protection regulations took effect in 2010 and have resulted in most new vehicles having side airbags, although this isn't a requirement. We previously saw how the proportion of vehicles earning good ratings on our crash tests have increased over time, and that virtually all model year vehicles in the last 10 years earned a good rating on the side and moderate overlap crash tests. However, there are still older vehicles on the roads without these safety features, and in this graph, any bar that extends below the 0% line at the top indicates the older driver age subgroup were less likely to have the feature in the crash-involved vehicle than the middle-aged drivers in the study. So we found that compared with middle-aged drivers, older drivers' crash-involved vehicles were less likely to have standard ESC and had protecting side airbags, and vehicles rated good in our two oldest crash tests, the side and the moderate overlap. So the oldest drivers, those 80 and older, crashed in vehicles least likely to have any of these fundamental safety features. Relative to middle-aged drivers, the likelihood that an older driver's crash-involved vehicle was equipped with ESC declined with increasing age. We can see here. Drivers 70 to 74 have the same likelihood of crashing in a vehicle with safety features of standard side airbags that protect the head, or a vehicle that rated good in the side crash test as middle-aged drivers, while drivers 75 and older were crashing in vehicles less likely to have those safety features, so these two here. And then drivers 70 and older crashed in vehicles less likely to be rated good in the moderate overlap crash test here. So crashing in a vehicle without these safety features can result in worse crash outcomes for the general population, but can be even worse for older drivers because of how their crash fatality rates increase with age. So this slide shows how the odds of an older driver dying in a crash increased when crashing in vehicles that had these safety features either optionally equipped or not available, compared with the older drivers who crashed in vehicles with these safety features standard. So any bar that hits above this dark line at 1 means the odds of an older driver dying increased. So the lighter blue represents all drivers ages 70 and older. The darker blue represents those drivers 80 and older. For ESC, we looked at the odds of older drivers dying in all types of crashes. What we found is that when older drivers crashed in vehicles without standard electronic stability control, their odds of dying was greater than older drivers who crashed in vehicles with ESC as standard, 37% higher for all drivers ages 70 and older, and 32% higher for those ages 80 and older. When older drivers were involved in a driver's side impact crash, drivers of vehicles that did not have head protecting side airbags had over double or 2 times the odds of dying compared with older drivers who did have those head protecting side airbags. So you can see that each of those lines hits above the 2 mark. So driving and crashing in a vehicle where these 2 features are either optional or not available increases the odds that an older driver will be fatally injured. Take a sip here. In the study where we analyzed Florida's crash data, we estimated declines in older drivers' fatalities if the older drivers in our sample drove vehicles more like the vehicles driven by the middle-aged drivers in the study when it came to vehicle type and size. So for example, small passenger cars, large SUVs, and the presence of ESC and head protecting side airbags. For drivers ages 70 and older, we estimated declines of 3% in all crashes and 5% in side impact crashes. For drivers 80 and older, we estimated declines of 5% for all crashes and 8% in side impact crashes. If you recall that the drivers ages 80 and older were the ones driving the oldest, least safe vehicles in our study, so they were more dissimilar to the middle-aged drivers' vehicles than when including the drivers in their 70s. We also found that older drivers were more likely to drive smaller, lighter vehicles than middle-aged drivers. And again, this can result in poor crash outcomes when the crash partner is larger and heavier. So we conducted another study, and this is kind of getting into that max estimate study where we looked at the crash avoidance technologies. So we estimated the number of crashes and driver injuries and calculated the number of driver fatalities relevant to these systems. We assumed that these systems are equipped on every vehicle on our roads and that these systems prevent 100% of the crashes they've been designed to target. But we know neither of these things are true, unfortunately. For example, inclement weather can cover lane lines on the roads, and also weather can interfere with sensors at times. So the actual number of crashes and subsequent injuries prevented by these systems each year will be lower. So this graph displays the results from the more widely available crash avoidance technologies of front crash prevention, blind spot detection, and lane departure prevention. I'll start with the front crash prevention systems. We found that they might be relevant to as many as 12% of older drivers' crash involvements, 9% of their injuries, and 3% of their fatalities. Automatic emergency braking in the real world has been shown to reduce rear-end crashes by about half, and this would equate to about 40,000 older driver crashes each year. Now, even though blind spot detection systems might be relevant to the fewest older driver crashes, this is 4%, and the resulting injuries of 1% and 0.4% of their total fatalities, I did want to highlight this technology because it does have the potential to make the driving task easier for some older drivers, particularly those that have any experience in or difficulties in turning the head or the neck or stiffness to check their blind spots prior to changing a lane. So having this technology might alleviate some of those difficulties that arise from limited mobility, especially since older drivers have reported difficulty with that task. Blind spot warning has been shown to reduce relevant crashes by 14% in the real world, and this would be about 4,000 older driver crashes each year. Lane departure prevention was relevant to as many as 3% of older drivers' crash involvements. This crash scenario tends to create more injuries than the other 2 systems. 9% of older drivers told of crashes that result in an injury potentially relevant to lane departure prevention, and as many as 22% of their fatalities. Studies of how many relevant crashes lane departure warning can reduce is 11%, and this would be about 2,500 older driver crashes each year. So when considering these 3 technologies combined, 20% of their crashes, along with 18% of their crash-related injuries and 25% of their crash-related fatalities might be relevant. So this means that older drivers can clearly stand to receive some benefit from driving vehicles equipped with these technologies when considering the proportion of their crashes that are relevant to these systems. So we wanted to share this slide with you all so you can see the potential benefits these crash avoidance features might be able to provide. And then we can see that many older drivers' crashes and resulting injuries are potentially relevant to these widely available technologies. We found that through the survey that we conducted, that older drivers were less likely to have required many of the crash avoidance technologies than middle-aged drivers when they purchased their last vehicle. And it is possible that this is because the older drivers we surveyed were driving the older vehicles, so these technologies weren't available at the time of purchase. Older drivers do not have excess crashes per vehicle miles traveled or per licensed drivers relative to younger drivers, but they are over-involved in certain crash scenarios, particularly crashes at intersections. So we also wanted to explore the potential benefits of intersection assistance features that are on the horizon. Since these are either not widely or yet available, I wanted to share with you just a high-level overview of how they're designed or conceptualized to work. The first is left turn assist, or LTA, and it is currently available on a few models, and this is relevant to left turn across path crashes. When a vehicle signals a left turn assist uses radar and or camera sensors to scan the road for oncoming vehicles. If oncoming traffic is detected, an alert is given to the vehicle making the left-hand turn and may apply the brakes if necessary. Vehicle-to-vehicle or V2V communication will allow for additional intersection assistance features. When this is widespread, V2V will work by monitoring 360 degrees around vehicles, and this will allow for information sharing with those similarly equipped vehicles to predict potential conflict points and then warn drivers. V2V would make possible V2V enhanced LTA. V2V enhanced LTA is designed for the exact same left turn across path crash scenario as the LTA that is currently available, but it could be an improvement because it wouldn't have to rely on radar line of sight capabilities. Furthermore, V2V enhanced LTA would alert both the driver making the left-hand turn and the driver traveling straight through the intersection of a possible crash. So this could increase the likelihood of at least one driver reacting. V2V would also make possible intersection movement assist, or IMA, and this will have the ability to prevent or mitigate additional common intersection crashes. IMA will be able to warn drivers of anticipated conflicts when a vehicle is traveling straight across another from the left or the right, so your T-bone situation. When one vehicle turns into the path of another, traveling in the final intended direction, again from left or right. And when one vehicle turns left across the path of another vehicle traveling in the opposite intended direction. So first we'll explore the maximum potential safety benefits of the left turn assist technologies. The paler shade of purple represents the conventional left turn assist that is available on a limited basis. And this is the one that can assist the vehicle when making the left turn across the path of another traveling straight. The slightly darker shade represents the crash involvements, injuries, and fatalities among the older drivers that were traveling straight in that scenario. So we can see that older drivers are more likely to be involved and injured when making the left turn, but more likely to be killed in that scenario when traveling straight. Intersection movement assist, or IMA. Again, this is the one that has the potential to prevent or mitigate 5 other intersection crash scenarios. Might be able to prevent as many as 24% of older drivers' crashes and crash-related injuries and about 19% of their crash-related fatalities. Up to 32% of older drivers' crashes, 38% of their injuries, and 29% of their fatalities might be addressed with these intersection assistance features combined. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, these systems are either rare or unavailable in the North American market. We can see with this graph that these intersection assistance features show a lot of promise in benefiting older drivers in all outcomes, with intersection movement assist relevant to crashes and injuries accounting for the most of the benefits overall. I did want to stress that even though older drivers can benefit greatly from these systems, I'm not understating at all the benefits that older drivers can gain from driving the vehicles that are equipped with the safety features that are more widespread and have been proven to provide safety gains. So just to kind of recap what we've learned here, vehicles are quickly becoming safer, and safer vehicles have been shown to translate to fewer crashes and fewer fatal injuries. We hope increased awareness of this can help persuade older drivers to rethink their vehicle ownership patterns. A low mileage old vehicle will not have many of these safety features that have been shown to reduce fatalities. Remember, older drivers can use all of the vehicle safety features they can get and should drive the safest vehicles they can afford. We understand that not every driver, especially now, vehicles are hard to come by and they're pricey. We understand that not everyone can afford a brand new vehicle, but even a vehicle 3 to 5 years old, a used vehicle may be an improvement. So with how rapidly these vehicle improvements are occurring, you can see how a 10-year-old vehicle a decade ago is not the same thing as a 10-year-old vehicle today. And again, we know that not older drivers can drive brand new vehicles, but used newer vehicles will likely have ESC, will likely have side airbags, and may even come with the crash avoidance technologies like the blind spot monitoring and front crash warnings. So if you happen to know your vehicle's crash test ratings that were conducted by the Institute's, great. If not, you can go to iihs.org/ratings, and all you need to do is type in your vehicle make, model, and year, and you can see how your vehicle performed in our crash test ratings. So that's all I have. I'm happy to revisit some questions now.
Okay, here we go. All right. That was great. And as I can tell you that I'm the beneficiary of a vehicle with the blind spot assistance. And I think there's some significant, and the keeping you in the lanes. And when you see the percentage of lives potentially saved by that technology, I can certainly understand it. And I have to say, like, one of the scary things is that I rely so much on that blind spot assistance that when I get in a vehicle that doesn't have it, I have to revert back to my old way of driving, the way I learned in high school, where you look twice over your shoulder, which I try to do even with that technology. But sure. I think sometimes this technology can kind of lull us into new behaviors behind the wheel.
Sure.
So let's address some of these questions that have come in here. Okay. Let's see. First, Margie says, apologies for being late. I was out being an older driver. Have you or will you cover driver safety concerns as well? I think this discussion on cars is helpful and informative. Have you done any sort of consumer research on, what older drivers are concerned about?
I have not personally, no. I am aware of other research that is going on in terms of access and ability to drive, but unfortunately I can't speak to anything directly.
Okay, great. And somebody else said, let's see, where was that? Somebody was saying, oh yeah, now, do you have older drivers involved in this testing? A lot of the videos and things that you were sharing with us were more the crash test dummy type thing, but are there actual drivers involved in any of your research and testing?
Not in the vehicle testing that we conduct. Those are engineers that are employed by the institutes. But when it comes to the survey we conducted and the Florida crash data, that is, we did survey older drivers. And then for the Florida crash study, we did filter out by driver age. So those were real life crashes that occurred.
Okay, great, great. Um, let's see, and I think this next question sort of may have come in before you did the slides, but just to reiterate, I think one of the key takeaways here is that unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, older drivers are driving older cars. And the reveal here is how this new technology can not only save the lives of all of us, but has been shown based on that data there that the newer technology increases the chances that an older driver may survive an unfortunate crash or avoid it entirely.
Exactly. These crash avoidance technologies are not designed for any one particular age group or driver demographic. They are designed for all road users. What we just wanted to do was look at if there were areas, because again, I mentioned that older drivers don't have more crashes per vehicle miles traveled or per licensed drivers, so they're not crashing more than some of the younger drivers. So again, but at the same time, everyone can benefit from these technologies. And the left turn assist in particular, because of the types of crashes that older drivers do have, even though it's not more than younger drivers, they are prone to that specific crash scenario. So the left turn assist in particular, even though designed for everyone, older drivers just might benefit a little bit more from it because of the types of crashes they tend to have.
Yeah. And then, you know, one of the reasons why older drivers are driving older cars is, lack of income.
Sure.
And again, it's not, it's because in general, you're working off retirement savings or a fixed income or what have you.
Mhm.
And Sheila says, are there efforts to make these systems adaptable to older vehicles? Older drivers cannot afford new vehicles. Now, Sheila, I know firsthand because I've got two teenage drivers in my house, and I was able to install a backup camera
Mhm.
aftermarket. Uh, Aimee, are you aware of any sort of things that can be done to adapt a vehicle?
Yes, they do have some capabilities for modifying existing vehicles. The front crash warnings, though, I know that is one in particular that can be modified. But I do want to make the point that it would only provide a warning to a driver. It would not be able to intervene on behalf of the vehicle. So it would not apply the brakes like the automatic emergency braking would. So there are some ways to do that. As you mentioned, the rear camera and some of the warning systems can be done, but not completely.
And on that topic of adapted vehicles, there's, today we're focusing on safety primarily,
Mhm.
but also there are ways to adapt a vehicle so somebody who is in a wheelchair can drive
Mhm.
and make possible adaptations there, which ties into safety, but it also ties into mobility. Um,
Absolutely.
let's see, does the research, Jennifer says, does the research identify certain manufacturers as preferable versus to other brands? Um, and I think, is this the research study we hear in all the, like the Subaru ads and things like that, where it's like, we got 5 stars on the IIHS study?
Right. We didn't look at any manufacturers or specific brands when it came to the Florida crash test study, but we did look at the other vehicle characteristics, like I mentioned the size, the weight, and size combination. So I would say, well, never mind. Yeah, no, just we didn't look at any specific manufacturers.
Manufacturer, yeah, it's the
Yeah,
actual vehicle. Yeah, you could see where a manufacturer could take advantage of that. If, hey, we got 5 stars as a manufacturer, and then they have one vehicle that sort of falls into the category.
sure.
This
I
is a
guess
great
real
question.
quick, I'm sorry to add to that though. I would add that going back to, and I can punch back here to this slide. Regardless of manufacturers, most of the vehicles that we are testing today are earning those good ratings.
Okay.
So again, I wouldn't get too focused on the manufacturers themselves, because most of them, particularly the moderate front overlap for the last 5 or so years, everyone we've tested is earned a good rating or a top rating, and you can see how that trend is going for
Yeah.
all of the 6 tests we conduct.
Couple of good questions here is, do insurance companies offer discounts for safer vehicles?
So even though we have insurance in our title, we don't insure vehicles, but we are funded by insurance companies. So I don't know of anything in terms of what insurance companies may or may not do. I know they do the things like the safe drivers, or the telematics types apps. But in terms of efforts to get older drivers into newer vehicles, I don't know of anything to that effect. I guess I would also add that really, even though older drivers can certainly benefit a great deal from driving newer, safer vehicles, the same would apply to drivers of all ages.
Yep.
So, yeah, not that I know of.
And another question, and you did address it, but just we can kind of throw it out there again, is why aren't these safety options required? And it sounds like the majority of the manufacturers are collaborating. So to sort of ideally, as we all know, a government mandate is what all companies want to avoid. And
Absolutely.
there's a benefit to the manufacturers integrating these. I think it sounds like there's a lot of cooperation and a lot of innovation from the manufacturer side. I think our big problem here is the old cars that are on the road. And to draw a comparison is, if you look at airbags, is that, I mean, most cars have airbags, but I regularly get into one of my friend's old cars that was pre-airbag, and it's still out there on the road.
Exactly right. I think for the most part, one of the government regulations are only on the airbags that have been shown for years to be effective, the rear cameras that have been shown to be effective for years. Like Steve mentioned, manufacturers don't always want that. But on the other hand, the safety ratings, even though we found that the oldest drivers value them less than the middle-aged drivers in the survey that we did, drivers are engaged by safe vehicles and look for safe vehicles when buying a new vehicle. So there is some incentive for the manufacturers to build the safer vehicles. As I showed in the video, the F-150 that was crash tested, that was, I believe, 3 model years difference. The Honda Odyssey that we crash tested was 2 model years difference. So there's just the motivation within the manufacturers to make the vehicle safer. And I think that is in part because of the crash testing that we do.
Great. And then I'm going to share my screen now briefly, because somebody brought up the AARP Safe Driver Program. which if you just go to aarpdriversafety.org, you can learn about that. I know that from having two teenage kids that just about every insurance company has some kind of driver safety program that can is providing you with training, but also potentially a discount on your insurance, which is something that everybody is eager to get. And maybe I'll see if I can't get somebody from the AARP driver safety program to come on a future discussion. Leilana says, is it possible to extrapolate from these studies the conclusion that the modern driver safety assistance would enable an older driver to continue driving longer than they otherwise had? Really, boy, sounds like another researcher there, Aimee. I agree. I think there's a conclusion that could be drawn there.
It's possible. I don't know if we necessarily, as an institute, want to make that connection, but it is possible. I guess I would say that the introduction of these technologies would allow, Steve, as you mentioned earlier, the blind spot monitoring just aids in the driving task. So same thing with the rear cameras. It allows people with limited mobility to not have to turn around and look behind. So there are aspects of it that could make it more comfortable or alleviate some of the difficulties that older drivers could experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah. At 50, almost 57, turning my neck is more difficult than it was when I was in my 20s. Ray has a good question. What does the insurance industry do with the information that you, like these research studies and things like that?
That's another question, again, because we're not an insurance industry. I can't speak to what they may or may not do with it. I would hope that they use it, especially because, just like Steve, you got the notice or you saw the press release from it. So I'm assuming that they see it, but I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think like all trade associations, they fund it and their members so that they have access to this objective data. That's
Absolutely.
my feeling. Yeah. Let's see. Terry says, recently purchased a Buick 2022 with these features you described today. I'm learning these new features. Is there a class one can take to teach drivers about these new features? Aimee, do you know of anything? But Terry, I would say lean on your dealership. But I'm not sure if there are any thoughts on that.
I would say we actually do work relatively closely with AARP, and they do have a smart driver tech program. So
Somebody
I think they
posted
would
that.
be
Yeah.
a phenomenal resource for really learning and getting comfortable with the features that are equipped on your vehicle. I will say that it sounds oftentimes like there's some hesitation or a sense that I don't need these features because I've been driving my whole life without them. Just want to kind of reiterate that they're designed for everyone. And even though you may think I can drive without them, they just offer an extra layer of security and safety. So again, being comfortable with using them is key, because if you're not comfortable with using them, you're not going to use them. You're not going to gain any benefit from them. So yes, certainly the Smart Driver Tech program. I have read some other research that has found that older drivers in particular, even though some may be hesitant to use the features, that once they are introduced, acceptance of them tends to be very positive and very high. Great. So that's promising.
Okay, and then I looked at the clock. It doesn't surprise me. We're past one here, but I'm going to keep on going here. Sure. We've got okay. Should older drivers choose larger, heavier cars? it seems size and weight and bumper could be important variables. As you had discussed this earlier, is that a heavier car is more likely to win in a battle with a lighter car.
Right.
But you know, we've all heard about the semis that are out there. So yes, having a heavier car, I think, is a benefit, but none of us have a crystal ball in the type of accident we're having, and sometimes an accident with with a non-moving object,
Sure.
as well.
Yeah. I would say ultimately, a larger, heavier vehicle is going to be safer for any occupant, just the simple physics of the matter. Again, particularly when involved in a crash with a larger crash partner. And that's why we revamped our side crash test to really be more representative of the crashes that are happening today. But at the same time, older drivers that do have limited mobility may have more difficulty getting in or out of a large SUV or truck. So that's something, it's not just a one size fits all. On the other hand, getting in and out of a passenger vehicle can also be difficult. So I would say the older driver should be comfortable getting in and out, and that a larger vehicle is going to just be safer overall for the occupant.
Got it.
To kind of, on the other hand, though, we've been finding that pedestrian fatalities and bicyclist fatalities are increasing because of the larger, heavier vehicles on the road. So it's there's some give and take.
Yeah, and Jennifer points out, and this seems to be a common theme on all of our discussions, that the inequity that the higher end luxury cars seem to have all these features, and then the
Sure.
lower cost. But just like airbags, I think that's how everything kind of starts. Is that although that doesn't help us today, one thing that I think we'll see in the future is that all cars will be equipped with this. And the scary thing in today's market, even cheap cars are expensive.
Right.
you know.
Right.
And Jennifer also points out, yeah, the height of the car versus a lower profile car could impact as well. Well, this has been amazing. Aimee, you really opened my eyes up to a research area that I wasn't aware of, and great data, and again, I want to thank our audience with all their great questions. This will be posted up later this afternoon, and Aimee, just stay in touch with us as you come across any any specific data or research related to older adults. We would love to be involved in that.
My pleasure. Well, thank you for having me, and I hope I was able to. I know, Steve, you said I was able to, inform you on some vehicle safety stuff, and I happen to see a lot of people in the audience were either watching because their parents are older or were older themselves. So I hope everyone enjoyed, and if you have any questions, I can. Steve, I don't know if you have my email to share, but
I'm
I've been
going to put
happy
that
to.
on the recording link there so
Great.
everybody can get in touch with you if they've got additional
Excellent.
stuff.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay. See everybody soon. All right. And oh, come on here.